I've been to many wonderful places, but none more extraordinary than here, the Galapagos Islands. These have been called nature's greatest experiment, for here life has evolved in isolation and produced some extraordinary results.
The Cenozoic era begins not with triumph, but with silence. 66 million years ago, the dominant rulers of the planet vanished in geological seconds. The non-avian dinosaurs, who had controlled terrestrial ecosystems for more than 160 million years, disappeared in the aftermath of an asteroid impact that altered the chemistry of the atmosphere, ignited global wildfires, and darkened the sky for months or years. The boundary between the Cretaceous and the Paleocene marks not simply an extinction, but a planetary reset. When the dust began to settle, Earth was no longer the world it had been. Forests were charred, food chains had collapsed. Photosynthesis had been interrupted by an impact winter that plunged temperatures downward. Sulfates and particulates in the upper atmosphere reflected sunlight, and acid rain likely fell across continents and oceans alike. Entire ecological networks disintegrated. Large-bodied animals with high metabolic demands were among the hardest hit. But extinction is not the end of life. It is the restructuring of life. The Cenozoic era, meaning recent life, opens with a biosphere stripped of its giants, yet rich with evolutionary potential. The Paleocene epoch begins in the shadow of devastation, but it quickly becomes an age of opportunity. In the immediate aftermath, ecosystems were simplified. Ferns and hardy pioneer plants dominated the earliest recovery landscapes. These species, adapted to disturbance, spread rapidly over burned terrain. Spores appear abundantly in the fossil record at the boundary, indicating that ferns may have temporarily carpeted vast regions of the globe. This so-called fern spike represents one of the first signs that photosynthetic life was reclaiming the land. The oceans experienced similar upheaval. Marine plankton communities were severely disrupted. Many species of ammonites and large marine reptiles vanished entirely. Coral reefs collapsed. Yet, microscopic organisms, particularly certain foraminifera and algae, survived and began repopulating the seas. As primary productivity slowly resumed, marine food webs rebuilt from the bottom upward. Climate during the earliest Paleocene remained relatively warm in the long term, despite the short-lived cooling following the impact. The late Cretaceous had been a greenhouse world with high atmospheric carbon dioxide levels, and the early Cenozoic inherited much of that warmth. There were no polar ice caps. Forests extended toward high latitudes. The continents, though drifting toward modern positions, still occupied different configurations that influenced ocean circulation and climate. North America and Eurasia were closer together. India was racing northward toward Asia. South America and Africa were still more isolated. Australia remained connected to Antarctica. These geographic arrangements would play critical roles in shaping the evolutionary trajectories of life in the coming millions of years. Into this recovering world stepped the survivors. Among the most important were mammals. Mammals had existed alongside dinosaurs for over 150 million years, but for most of that time they occupied small, often nocturnal niches. Many were no larger than rodents. Their evolutionary experimentation had been constrained by the ecological dominance of reptiles that filled the roles of large herbivores and apex predators. When those reptilian giants vanished, the constraints dissolved. Early Paleocene mammals were diverse in form, though still modest in size. Some resembled shrews or opossums. Others were small insectivores that foraged in leaf litter. Still others were arboreal climbers, exploiting forest canopies that were rapidly regenerating. Without large dinosaurs to compete with or prey upon them, mammals began to radiate into vacant ecological spaces. Evolution operates through variation and selection. In the wake of mass extinction, ecological niches become available. The organisms that survive often possess traits that allow flexibility. Mammals had several advantages. They were endothermic, capable of maintaining stable internal temperatures. Many gave live birth and provided parental care, increasing offspring survival. Their differentiated teeth allowed varied diets. Their relatively large brains supported behavioral adaptability. These characteristics, once overshadowed, now became decisive. Within a few million years, mammalian body sizes began to increase. Fossil evidence shows that lineages diversified rapidly, producing new herbivores, carnivores, omnivores, and specialized feeders. Early placental mammals split into major groups that would eventually give rise to primates, ungulates, carnivorans, and others. Marsupials also diversified, particularly in regions like South America and Australia, where isolation shaped unique evolutionary pathways. Birds, too, benefited from the extinction of non-avian dinosaurs. As the only surviving dinosaur lineage, avian species expanded into numerous ecological roles. Some became large, flightless predators, occupying niches once filled by small theropods. Others diversified into waterfowl, shorebirds, and forest dwellers. The sky, once shared with pterosaurs, now belonged entirely to birds. Reptiles did not vanish entirely. Crocodilians survived and continued to occupy aquatic predator roles. Turtles persisted, lizards and snakes diversified. Yet the balance of terrestrial dominance shifted decisively toward mammals and birds. The Paleocene world remained heavily forested. Dense, warm forests covered much of North America, Europe, and Asia. High rainfall and elevated carbon dioxide supported lush vegetation. These forests were not yet dominated by grasses. Instead, they were complex ecosystems of flowering plants, ferns, palms, and early hardwood trees. Insects flourished within these environments, pollinating flowers and forming intricate ecological relationships. Many modern plant families trace their expansion to this period. Coevolution between plants and pollinators accelerated, shaping biodiversity in profound ways. Roughly 10 million years into the Paleocene, Earth experienced another dramatic climatic event, the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum, often abbreviated as the PETM. Although technically marking the transition into the Eocene, its roots lie in processes unfolding during the Paleocene. The PETM represents one of the most rapid global warming events in the geological record. Massive amounts of carbon were released into the atmosphere and oceans, possibly from volcanic activity, methane hydrates, or other carbon reservoirs. Global temperatures spiked by several degrees Celsius in a relatively short geological interval. This warming event had cascading effects. Tropical conditions extended into polar regions. Crocodile-like reptiles inhabited high latitudes. Forests thrived even in areas that today are tundra. Ocean chemistry shifted, leading to acidification that affected marine organisms. For mammals, the petum was both a challenge and an opportunity. Fossil records show a temporary reduction in body size among many species, possibly as an adaptation to heat stress. At the same time, new lineages appeared, including some of the earliest true primates and hoofed mammals. The Paleocene, therefore, was not merely a recovery period. It was a laboratory of evolution. By the end of this epoch, ecosystems had become increasingly complex. Food webs were re-established, predation pressures intensified. Herbivores diversified into browsing forms that fed on leaves and fruits. Carnivorous mammals evolved sharper teeth and improved locomotion to pursue prey. One of the most significant developments during this time was the differentiation of placental mammals into distinct superorders. These included groups that would later produce whales, bats, primates, and large terrestrial herbivores. Genetic and fossil evidence indicates that the roots of modern mammalian diversity lie in this explosive radiation. Meanwhile, continental drift continued its slow but relentless movement. India approached Asia, setting the stage for a collision that would eventually raise the Himalayas. The Atlantic Ocean widened as North America and Europe drifted apart. Ocean currents adjusted in response, influencing climate patterns. Geology and biology are inseparable in Earth's history. As continents shift, they alter coastlines, mountain ranges, and ocean gateways. These changes affect rainfall patterns, temperature gradients, and the distribution of habitats. Life responds, adapts, migrates, or goes extinct. In the early Cenozoic, the absence of polar ice meant sea levels were relatively high. Coastal plains were extensive. Shallow seas covered parts of continents. These environments supported rich marine life and influenced terrestrial climates by moderating temperature extremes. Predation began to reshape mammalian evolution in more complex ways. As herbivores grew larger, carnivores followed. Creodonts, an early group of carnivorous mammals, emerged as apex predators in some regions. Though they would later decline, during the Paleocene they represented a major predatory lineage. Competition also intensified. With the vacuum left by dinosaurs filled, mammals began competing among themselves for resources. Natural selection favored innovations in locomotion, dentition, and sensory systems. Vision improved in some lineages, hearing and olfaction became more specialized. Forests were structured vertically, offering multiple ecological layers. Small mammals occupied undergrowth and tree branches. Larger browsing forms roamed the forest floor. Arboreal species leapt between branches. Each adaptation reflected the ecological complexity of a recovering planet. In the oceans, marine mammals had not yet appeared. That transformation would come later in the Eocene. For now, marine ecosystems were dominated by fish, sharks, and surviving reptilian lineages such as sea turtles and crocodilians. Coral reefs gradually re-established themselves, though their composition differed from pre-extinction communities. The recovery from the Cretaceous catastrophe illustrates a fundamental principle of Earth history. Life is resilient, but not invulnerable. Mass extinctions eliminate dominant groups, but they also create opportunities for evolutionary innovation. The Cenozoic era would ultimately become the age of mammals, but its origins were rooted in ecological instability. As millions of years passed, body sizes continued to increase. By the late Paleocene, some mammals approached the size of small bears. Herbivorous forms developed more complex teeth for processing vegetation. Digestive systems adapted to ferment plant material more efficiently. Climate remained warm overall, but variability increased. Regional differences in rainfall and temperature created mosaic habitats. These variations promoted diversification by isolating populations and subjecting them to different selective pressures. The story of the Cenozoic does not begin with dominance. It begins with adaptation. The early Paleocene world was quieter than the Mesozoic. No towering sauropods shook the ground. No massive theropods stalked the plains. Instead, smaller creatures moved through dense forests, experimenting with forms and behaviors that would shape the next 66 million years. Primates, though still primitive, began to emerge during this time. Adapted for arboreal life, they possessed grasping hands and forward-facing eyes that improved depth perception. These traits were advantageous in complex forest canopies. Though far removed from humans, these early primates represent one of the many evolutionary threads that trace back to the Paleocene. Another key development was the expansion of flowering plants. Angiosperms had originated earlier, but they flourished during the Cenozoic. Their fruits and seeds provided new food sources for mammals and birds, reinforcing mutualistic relationships between plants and animals. Pollination networks became increasingly intricate. Bees and other insects diversified. Birds evolved specialized beaks. Mammals consumed fruits and dispersed seeds across landscapes. Ecosystems became more interconnected. Even as life diversified, Earth remained geologically active. Volcanic activity released gases into the atmosphere. Tectonic collisions uplifted terrain. Rivers carved new valleys. Sediments accumulated, preserving fossils that would one day reveal this story. The Paleocene closes with a world transformed from devastation to dynamism. It was not yet the world of grasslands and large herds. It was a forested greenhouse planet populated by increasingly ambitious mammals. The extinction of the dinosaurs did not guarantee mammalian success. It created the possibility. What followed was a complex interplay of climate, geography, and evolutionary innovation. By the dawn of the Eocene, the foundations were laid for even more dramatic change. Temperatures would rise to extraordinary levels. New lineages would appear, including the ancestors of whales and bats. The Cenozoic story was only beginning, but its first chapter remains defined by recovery. A planet scarred by impact rebuilt itself through biological persistence. Tiny mammals that once scurried beneath dinosaur feet became architects of a new ecological order. Forests returned, oceans stabilized, food webs regained complexity. The Paleocene stands as a testament to the power of life to endure upheaval. It also serves as a reminder that dominance in Earth's history is temporary. The dinosaurs ruled for millions of years, yet a single cosmic event ended their supremacy. In their absence, mammals rose, not through superiority alone, but through adaptability. The early Cenozoic was a time of experimentation. Evolution tested new body plans, diets, and behaviors. Some lineages flourished, others disappeared. Natural selection shaped survivors into increasingly specialized forms. As the first 10 million years of the Cenozoic unfolded, Earth transitioned from chaos to creativity. The biosphere reorganized. Ecological hierarchies shifted. Energy flowed once more through complex networks of producers, consumers, and decomposers. The silence after extinction gave way to new sounds. The rustle of small mammals in leaf litter, the calls of expanding bird populations, the hum of insects in flowering forests. This was the beginning of the age of mammals, not through conquest, but through opportunity. The Paleocene laid the groundwork for every major development that followed in the Cenozoic era. Without this recovery, there would be no whales in the oceans, no horses on the plains, no primates in the trees. The world that followed the dinosaurs was not immediately recognizable as our own. Yet, within its forests and warming seas were the genetic blueprints of modern ecosystems. The first chapter of the Cenozoic is therefore not merely about survival, it is about transformation. From ashes rose diversity, from devastation came innovation, and from small nocturnal survivors emerged the lineage that would one day reshape the planet itself. The Cenozoic had begun. If the Paleocene was an age of recovery, the Eocene was an age of excess. By 56 million years ago, Earth had entered one of the warmest intervals of the entire Cenozoic era. Atmospheric carbon dioxide concentrations were high, there were no permanent polar ice sheets. Tropical and subtropical forests extended far into latitudes that today experience freezing winters. The planet operated in a greenhouse state, driven by elevated greenhouse gases and altered ocean circulation. At the boundary between the Paleocene and Eocene occurred a dramatic climatic disruption known as the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum. In geological terms, it was abrupt. Within a relatively short span, global temperatures increased by approximately 5 to 8 degrees Celsius. Massive amounts of carbon entered the atmosphere and oceans. The precise source remains debated, but leading hypotheses include volcanic outgassing associated with the opening of the North Atlantic, destabilization of methane hydrates on continental shelves, or oxidation of organic-rich sediments. The consequences were profound. Ocean temperatures rose sharply. In deep waters, oxygen levels declined, creating stressed marine environments. Carbon isotope signatures in sediments reveal the scale of the perturbation. Ocean acidification occurred as dissolved carbon dioxide formed carbonic acid, reducing the availability of carbonate ions required by many marine organisms to build shells. On land, ecosystems reorganized in response to heat and humidity. Tropical vegetation expanded poleward. Fossil evidence from the Arctic shows the presence of crocodilian relatives and lush forests growing at high latitudes. The concept of frozen polar landscapes did not exist during this interval. This greenhouse world reshaped evolution. Mammals, already diversifying during the Paleocene, entered a new phase of radiation. The warming event appears to coincide with the first appearance of several modern mammalian orders in the fossil record, including early primates, artiodactyls, and perissodactyls. Though the exact evolutionary relationships are complex, the Eocene represents the stage on which many familiar lineages first became recognizable. Body size trends during the thermal maximum show a temporary dwarfing effect in several mammalian species. Smaller bodies dissipate heat more efficiently, an advantage in extreme warmth. This biological response underscores how rapidly life can react to climatic stressors. As temperatures stabilized at elevated levels following the PETM, the Eocene matured into a long-lasting greenhouse epoch. Forests dominated continental interiors. These were dense, multi-layered ecosystems composed of early forms of many plant families that persist today. Palms, magnolias, and broadleaf evergreens flourished. The structure of these forests created complex ecological niches. Arboreal mammals diversified dramatically. Early primates developed enhanced grasping abilities, stereoscopic vision, and flexible shoulder joints. Their adaptations suggest a life spent navigating branches in pursuit of fruits and insects. Though primitive compared to later forms, they represent the foundation of primate evolution. Among the most transformative evolutionary experiments of the Eocene was the return of mammals to the sea. In the early Eocene, certain land-dwelling mammals inhabiting coastal regions began exploiting aquatic food resources. Fossils from South Asia revealed transitional forms such as Pachycetus and Ambulocetus, creatures that retained functional limbs for walking but exhibited skeletal modifications associated with swimming. Over millions of years, these amphibious mammals underwent radical anatomical change. Limbs transformed into flippers, hind legs reduced, tails developed powerful flukes. Nostrils migrated toward the top of the skull, eventually forming blowholes. The pelvis detached from the spine, allowing greater flexibility in swimming. These early whales, known as Archaeocetes, represent one of the most dramatic macroevolutionary transitions in the fossil record. By the middle to late Eocene, fully aquatic whales such as Basilosaurus dominated marine environments. Though different from modern whales, they were apex predators of their time. The oceans of the Eocene were no longer devoid of large vertebrate mammals. On land, herbivorous mammals diversified into forms adapted for browsing on leaves rather than grazing on grasses, which were not yet widespread. Early horses, small and multi-toed, lived in forested habitats. Their teeth were suited for soft vegetation. Rhinoceros, relatives, and tapir-like animals appeared. Artiodactyls evolved specialized digestive systems to process plant material efficiently. Predatory mammals also diversified. Creodonts continued to occupy apex roles, but early members of carnivora began emerging. These animals possessed specialized carnassial teeth for slicing flesh, a trait that would later characterize modern carnivorans. Birds underwent their own radiations. Some lineages became large, flightless predators in certain regions, filling ecological niches left vacant since the extinction of large theropod dinosaurs. Others specialized in aquatic feeding or forest-dwelling lifestyles. Reptiles persisted in warm climates. Crocodilians ranged far north of their current distributions. Snakes diversified, exploiting both terrestrial and arboreal niches. The Eocene world was not only warm but also tectonically dynamic. India collided with Asia during this epoch, initiating the uplift of the Himalayan mountain range. This collision had profound climatic consequences. Mountain building influences atmospheric circulation patterns, enhances chemical weathering of rocks, and can draw down carbon dioxide from the atmosphere over geological timescales. The continued separation of Antarctica from other land masses also began to alter ocean currents. Though full isolation and the formation of the Antarctic circumpolar current would occur later, the seeds of climatic change were being sown. Sea levels during the Eocene were high due to the absence of large ice sheets. Shallow epicontinental seas covered portions of continents. Coastal ecosystems were extensive and biologically productive. Mangrove-like environments thrived in warm coastal waters. Marine ecosystems during the Eocene were complex. Sharks diversified, including early ancestors of modern lineages. Bony fish radiated into coral reef and open ocean niches. Marine invertebrates, recovering from earlier disruptions, formed intricate food webs. Yet the greenhouse stability of the Eocene was not permanent. Toward the late Eocene, global temperatures began a gradual decline. Carbon dioxide levels decreased, possibly due to increased weathering associated with mountain uplift and changes in ocean circulation. This cooling trend marked the beginning of a fundamental shift in Earth's climate system. The late Eocene saw the first signs of Antarctic glaciation. Though not yet a fully developed ice sheet, evidence indicates that cooler conditions were emerging at high southern latitudes. The transition from a greenhouse world toward an icehouse state would accelerate in the next epoch. Biologically, the Eocene represents the zenith of early Cenozoic warmth and forest dominance. Mammals achieved unprecedented diversity. The foundational body plans of many modern groups became established. Whales conquered the oceans. Primates expanded in arboreal environments. Ungulates diversified into distinct lineages. The ecological structure of the planet was becoming increasingly modern in its composition, though not yet in its climatic configuration. One of the defining characteristics of the Eocene is its demonstration of climate sensitivity. The PETM revealed how rapidly Earth systems could respond to massive carbon release. Temperature spikes, ocean acidification, and biological responses are recorded clearly in sedimentary layers. These geological archives provide critical insights into feedback mechanisms within the Earth system. Feedback loops during the PETM likely amplified warming. For example, warming may have destabilized methane hydrates, releasing additional greenhouse gases. Reduced albedo from diminishing ice or cloud changes could have further intensified heating. Such processes illustrate the interconnectedness of atmosphere, hydrosphere, lithosphere, and biosphere. As cooling began in the late Eocene, evolutionary pressures shifted. Forest habitats gradually contracted in some regions. Seasonal variability increased. Organisms adapted to these changes or faced extinction. The decline of creodont predators near the end of the Eocene coincides with the rise of more advanced carnivorans. Evolution is not linear but competitive. Lineages that innovate successfully often replace those that do not. Similarly, some archaic mammalian groups that thrived in the warm early Eocene disappeared as climates cooled. Adaptations suited for dense tropical forests were less advantageous in increasingly open and seasonal landscapes. The Eocene also marks the expansion of marine plankton communities that would play key roles in carbon cycling. Calcareous nanoplankton and other microorganisms contributed to the sequestration of carbon in marine sediments, influencing long-term climate regulation. As the epoch drew to a close around 34 million years ago, a major climatic event occurred at the Eocene-Oligocene boundary. Temperatures dropped more sharply. A permanent ice sheet formed on Antarctica. Sea levels fell. Ocean circulation reorganized as the Antarctic circumpolar current strengthened, thermally isolating the continent. This transition represents one of the most significant climate shifts of the Cenozoic. The greenhouse world of the early Cenozoic gave way to an increasingly icehouse-dominated planet. From a biological perspective, the Eocene can be understood as the age in which mammals moved from experimentation to expansion. By its end, whales were fully marine. Hoofed mammals had diversified into multiple ecological roles. Carnivorans were establishing dominance among predators. Primates had radiated into various arboreal niches. The world remained forest-rich, but pressures were mounting that would eventually favor open habitats and grazing strategies. The second chapter of the Cenozoic story is therefore characterized by warmth, innovation, and the first signals of cooling. It is the epoch in which the structural blueprint of modern mammalian diversity was drafted. Without the Eocene greenhouse, whales might never have returned to the oceans. Without arboreal primate expansion, later hominin evolution would have been impossible. Without tectonic collisions, the climatic shifts that shaped later ecosystems might not have occurred. Earth, during the Eocene, was a planet of extremes. Polar forests, giant reptiles in high latitudes, warm oceans rich with early whales, and continents drifting toward their modern configuration. Yet, beneath the apparent stability of its warmth, forces were accumulating that would transform the planet once more. Cooling would intensify, grasslands would spread, ice would claim Antarctica, mammals would adapt to new pressures. The Cenozoic world that followed the dinosaurs was not static. It evolved through oscillations of heat and cold, through mountain uplift and ocean reorganization, through extinction and radiation. The Eocene stands as a reminder that Earth's climate system can shift dramatically under sufficient perturbation. It also demonstrates the extraordinary evolutionary plasticity of mammals when ecological opportunity aligns with environmental change. As the greenhouse world faded and ice began to accumulate at the poles, a new chapter prepared to unfold. The dominance of forests would be challenged. Open habitats would expand. The age of grazers and pursuit predators would begin. But that transformation belongs to the next stage of the Cenozoic story. Here, at the close of the Eocene, the planet balanced between warmth and ice, between ancient lineages and emerging modern forms. The world that followed the dinosaurs had matured into complexity. It had produced whales from land, mammals, primates from small arboreal insectivores, and vast forests stretching from equator to pole. Yet, change was inevitable, and in the cooling winds of the late Eocene, the next evolutionary revolution was already underway. By 34 million years ago, the Earth crossed a climatic threshold that would permanently alter the trajectory of the Cenozoic era. The transition from the Eocene to the Oligocene marks one of the most significant global cooling events in the last 66 million years. Where the Eocene had been defined by greenhouse warmth, high sea levels, and forests extending into polar latitudes, the Oligocene introduced a new climatic regime, the birth of a true icehouse world. The most dramatic development was the formation of a large, persistent ice sheet on Antarctica. This transformation did not occur in isolation. It was the cumulative result of tectonic shifts, atmospheric changes, and ocean circulation reorganization. As Australia and South America continued drifting away from Antarctica, ocean gateways widened. The opening of the Drake Passage between South America and Antarctica, along with the deepening of the Tasman Gateway, allowed the establishment of the Antarctic Circumpolar Current. This current encircled Antarctica, thermally isolating the continent from warmer tropical waters. Without warm oceanic heat transport reaching its shores, Antarctica cooled rapidly. Snow that once melted seasonally began to accumulate year after year, compressing into glacial ice. Over time, this accumulation formed a continental-scale ice sheet. The growth of Antarctic ice had cascading effects. Ice sheets increased planetary albedo, reflecting more solar radiation back into space. This feedback reinforced global cooling. As water became locked in ice, global sea levels fell. Coastal plains expanded and shallow seas retreated. The Oligocene was therefore not merely cooler, it was structurally different from the greenhouse world that preceded it. Atmospheric carbon dioxide levels declined during this period, though estimates vary. Enhanced chemical weathering of newly uplifted mountain ranges, including the Himalayas, may have drawn down CO2 from the atmosphere. Weathering processes consume carbon dioxide as rainwater reacts with silicate rocks, eventually transporting carbon to the oceans where it can be sequestered in sediments. The interplay between tectonics and climate is evident here. The collision of India with Asia not only created towering mountains, but also altered global carbon cycling. As climates cooled, ecosystems responded. Forests that had thrived in high latitudes retreated toward the equator. Seasonal variation intensified. In many regions, open woodlands began replacing dense tropical forests. This environmental restructuring exerted new selective pressures on terrestrial life. Mammals that had evolved in warm, forest-dominated habitats now faced expanding open landscapes. Adaptations suited for life among trees became less advantageous in more exposed environments. Natural selection favored new forms of locomotion, feeding strategies, and sensory perception. One of the most significant ecological transitions of the Oligocene was the gradual spread of grasses. Although grasses originated earlier, they were not yet dominant during the Eocene. In the Oligocene, cooler and drier conditions in certain regions allowed grasslands to expand. Grass is not simply another plant type. It represents a fundamental shift in ecosystem structure. Grasses grow from the base rather than the tip, allowing them to withstand grazing. They contain silica particles that increase tooth wear in herbivores. Their expansion would ultimately drive the evolution of entirely new mammalian adaptations. In the early Oligocene, however, grasslands were still patchy rather than continuous. Woodlands and open forests remained common. Yet the seeds of a more open world had been planted. Herbivorous mammals began evolving teeth better suited for processing tougher vegetation. The development of higher-crowned teeth, known as hypsodonti, allowed animals to cope with increased tooth wear from abrasive plants and dust. This innovation would become increasingly important in later epochs as grasslands expanded further. Among ungulates, diversification accelerated. Perissodactyls, the odd-toed hoof mammals that include horses and rhinoceroses, adapted to new ecological niches. Artiodactyls, the even-toed ungulates, also expanded in diversity. Their digestive systems, particularly in ruminant lineages, allowed more efficient extraction of nutrients from plant material. Predators evolved in parallel. The decline of creodonts continued, while true carnivorans diversified into distinct lineages that would eventually produce dogs, cats, and bears. Enhanced locomotor efficiency became crucial in more open habitats, where speed and endurance mattered more than stealth in dense forests. The Oligocene also witnessed significant developments in marine ecosystems. Whales, having transitioned fully to aquatic life in the Eocene, underwent further diversification. Early Archaeocetes declined, replaced by more modern lineages that split into two major groups, toothed whales and baleen whales. Toothed whales evolved echolocation capabilities, enabling sophisticated hunting strategies in murky or deep waters. Baleen whales began experimenting with filter-feeding mechanisms that would later allow massive body sizes. Ocean cooling influenced marine productivity patterns. The strengthening of ocean currents altered nutrient distribution. Upwelling zones in certain regions increased productivity, supporting rich marine food webs. Sharks remained dominant marine predators. Bony fish diversified. Marine invertebrates adapted to cooler conditions. Antarctica itself transformed from a forested landmass into a frozen continent. Fossil evidence indicates that before glaciation, Antarctica supported temperate forests with diverse flora and fauna. As ice advanced, these ecosystems vanished. Terrestrial life retreated or went extinct. The formation of Antarctic ice also influenced global ocean chemistry. Cold water sinking around Antarctica drove thermohaline circulation patterns, redistributing heat and nutrients across the globe. This reorganization of ocean currents became a defining feature of the modern climate system. The Oligocene world was therefore cooler, drier in many regions, and increasingly seasonal. In Africa, environmental changes would eventually influence primate evolution. Although early primates had flourished in Eocene forests, the contraction of dense forests created fragmented habitats. Some primate lineages declined, while others adapted to more open woodland environments. The fossil record from Africa during the Oligocene includes early members of the anthropoid lineage, the group that would eventually produce monkeys, apes, and humans. These early anthropoids exhibited traits suggesting enhanced visual acuity and social complexity. In South America, prolonged isolation due to continental separation produced unique evolutionary experiments. Mammalian fauna there included unusual ungulates and marsupial predators that evolved independently of their northern counterparts. This phenomenon, known as convergent evolution, illustrates how similar ecological pressures can produce analogous adaptations in unrelated lineages. Australia, still connected to Antarctica at the beginning of the Oligocene, but gradually separating, developed its own distinct marsupial-dominated ecosystems. Isolation became a powerful evolutionary driver. As cooling continued, ice volume fluctuations began introducing early glacial cycles, though not yet as intense as those of the later Pleistocene. These early oscillations influenced sea levels and habitat availability. The drop in sea level exposed land bridges in certain regions, facilitating faunal exchanges between continents. These exchanges reshaped biodiversity patterns and intensified competition among lineages. The Oligocene is sometimes described as a transitional epoch. It bridges the extreme warmth of the early Cenozoic and the more variable climates of the later Neogene. Yet this characterization understates its importance. It was during the Oligocene that the structural foundations of the modern climate system emerged. Permanent polar ice, reorganized ocean circulation, declining atmospheric carbon dioxide, and expanding open habitats collectively shifted Earth into a new regime. Evolution responded accordingly. Mammalian brain size increased in several lineages. Sensory adaptations improved. Social behaviors may have become more complex in some groups as environmental pressures intensified. In open habitats, vision became increasingly important for detecting predators and prey at distance. Limb morphology adapted for sustained locomotion rather than short bursts within forest cover. Energy budgets shifted in response to changing vegetation. The Oligocene also saw the continued evolution of bats, which had first appeared in the Eocene. These flying mammals diversified into insectivorous and fruit-eating forms, exploiting aerial niches that birds had long dominated. Echolocation refined their nocturnal hunting capabilities. In marine environments, the divergence of baleen and toothed whales represents one of the most consequential evolutionary splits of the Cenozoic. Baleen whales, by filtering small organisms from vast volumes of water, tapped into abundant but previously underutilized food resources. This strategy would later enable the evolution of the largest animals in Earth's history. Toothed whales, including early relatives of dolphins, refined predatory tactics. Echolocation allowed them to navigate and hunt with precision, even in dark or turbid waters. The Oligocene cooling did not produce uniform aridity. Some regions remained humid and forested, others became more open and seasonal. This heterogeneity promoted diversification by creating varied selective landscapes. As the epoch progressed, Antarctic glaciation stabilized. The presence of a permanent southern ice sheet fundamentally altered global heat distribution. The equator to pole temperature gradient increased compared to the Eocene. This gradient influences atmospheric circulation patterns, including jet streams and storm tracks. Thus, the Oligocene marks the beginning of climatic structures that would later characterize the Quaternary Ice Ages. Life continued to innovate. Ungulates diversified into increasingly specialized forms. Early deer-like animals appeared. Rhinoceros relatives adapted to varied browsing strategies. Horses remained relatively small compared to their later descendants, but their lineage was experimenting with new dental and limb morphologies. Carnivorans split into distinct clades. Caniforms, the dog-like carnivores, and feliforms, the cat-like carnivores, began differentiating in anatomy and ecological roles. This divergence laid the groundwork for the predator guilds of later epochs. Primates in Africa experienced both setbacks and radiations. The fossil record suggests that early anthropoids diversified into forms adapted to varied forest types. Some lineages would later give rise to Old World monkeys and apes. The Oligocene also records significant turnover events in both marine and terrestrial faunas, reflecting the combined pressures of climate change and competition. By the end of the epoch, around 23 million years ago, Earth had firmly transitioned into a cooler, more variable climate regime. Antarctic ice persisted, sea levels were lower than in the Eocene, open habitats were expanding. The world was no longer uniformly tropical. The significance of the Oligocene lies in its role as the architect of modernity. It introduced polar ice, reorganized oceans, and set evolutionary trends that would dominate the Neogene. Where the Eocene had been a world of lush forests and experimental mammals, the Oligocene demanded adaptation to cooling and increasing environmental heterogeneity. The age of mammals did not stagnate under these pressures. It diversified further. By its close, the stage was set for another transformation. Grasslands would expand dramatically in the Miocene, grazing mammals would dominate vast plains, apes would diversify in African forests and woodlands, ocean productivity would fluctuate with shifting currents. The third chapter of the Cenozoic is therefore defined by cooling and restructuring. The dinosaurs had vanished millions of years earlier. Mammals had risen in warmth. Now they were being tested by cold. Antarctica froze. Sea levels fell. Forests retreated. Grass began its quiet expansion. In this shifting world, adaptability once again proved decisive. And the Cenozoic story moved forward into an era of open landscapes, powerful herbivores, and increasingly sophisticated predators. The icehouse world had begun. By 23 million years ago, the Earth entered a new phase of the Cenozoic era known as the Miocene. If the Oligocene had established the foundations of a cooler world with permanent Antarctic ice, the Miocene would intensify and refine those changes. It was an epoch of expansion, collision, innovation, and biological scale. The Miocene did not begin with catastrophe. It began with momentum. Antarctica remained glaciated, locking away vast volumes of water in ice sheets that influenced global sea levels and ocean circulation. Atmospheric carbon dioxide levels were lower than in the early Cenozoic, though still higher than pre-industrial modern levels. The global climate was cooler than during the Eocene, yet not uniformly cold. Instead, the Miocene climate was dynamic, oscillating between warmer and cooler intervals. One of the most defining features of the Miocene was the dramatic expansion of grasslands. Grasses had appeared earlier, but during the Miocene they spread across continents on a scale never before seen. Several interacting factors contributed to this expansion. Continued global cooling created more seasonal climates. Mountain building altered rainfall patterns. In particular, the uplift of the Himalayas and the Tibetan Plateau reshaped atmospheric circulation across Asia, intensifying monsoon systems and influencing global wind patterns. As environments became more open and drier in many regions, grasses gained competitive advantage over trees and shrubs. Their growth strategy, rooted at the base, allowed them to recover quickly from grazing and fire. Their silica-rich tissues made them abrasive to herbivore teeth, favoring animals with specialized dentition. The spread of grasslands transformed terrestrial ecosystems. Where once forests had dominated vast areas, open savannas and prairies now extended across continents. North America, Africa, Eurasia, and parts of South America developed extensive grassland systems. These landscapes favored new modes of locomotion and feeding. Herbivorous mammals adapted rapidly. One of the most important evolutionary trends of the Miocene was the development of high-crowned teeth among grazing mammals. Hypsodont teeth with extended enamel surfaces resisted the wear caused by silica in grasses and by dust in open environments. This adaptation allowed animals to feed on abrasive vegetation throughout their lives. Horses illustrate this transformation clearly. Early Cenozoic horses were small, forest-dwelling browsers with multiple toes. During the Miocene, many horse lineages increased in size, developed longer limbs for efficient running, reduced the number of toes, and evolved high-crowned teeth suited for grazing. Speed became an essential survival trait in open habitats where predators could be seen from afar. Ruminant artiodactyls also diversified extensively. Antelope-like animals, early deer, and bovids radiated across grasslands. Their complex stomach systems allowed efficient fermentation of plant matter. Herding behavior likely evolved as a response to predation pressure in open environments. Predators responded in parallel. Carnivorans diversified into increasingly specialized forms. Early members of the dog lineage developed cursorial adaptations with elongated limbs and improved endurance for pursuit hunting. The ancestors of cats evolved refined predatory tools, including retractable claws and powerful forelimbs for grappling prey. Among the most iconic predators of the Miocene were the saber-toothed cats. Though not identical to the later Smilodon of the Pleistocene, Miocene megarodonts possessed elongated canine teeth and robust forelimbs. These predators illustrate convergent evolutionary experimentation with specialized killing strategies. The open habitats of the Miocene favored pursuit, predation, pack hunting, and coordinated strategies. Social behavior among some carnivorans may have intensified under these conditions. The Miocene was not solely an age of grasslands and terrestrial giants. It was also a period of remarkable marine evolution. Whales continued diversifying. Baleen whales refined filter-feeding techniques, enabling the exploitation of plankton-rich waters. Ocean currents, shaped by tectonic changes, influenced nutrient upwelling zones that supported abundant marine life. The Miocene oceans were home to some of the largest predatory sharks ever to exist. Megalodon emerged during this epoch, reaching lengths exceeding 15 meters. This apex predator likely preyed upon marine mammals, including early whales. Its massive serrated teeth, found in Miocene deposits worldwide, testify to its dominance. Dolphin lineages diversified extensively, refining echolocation and social behaviors. Marine ecosystems became increasingly structured around complex food webs, linking plankton, fish, marine mammals, and apex predators. Tectonics continued reshaping the globe. The collision between Africa and Eurasia progressed, narrowing the Tethys Sea and altering marine connectivity. This process contributed to the formation of the Mediterranean region. The uplift of mountain ranges influenced atmospheric circulation and rainfall distribution, reinforcing aridification in certain areas while increasing precipitation in others. In Africa, the Miocene environment was particularly dynamic. Forests persisted in some regions, but savannas expanded in others. This mosaic landscape played a critical role in primate evolution. The Miocene is often referred to as the Age of Apes. Early in the epoch, diverse ape lineages flourished across Africa, Europe, and Asia. These Miocene apes experimented with various locomotor strategies, including brachiation, quadrupedalism, and climbing. Some possessed body plans distinct from any living ape. The diversity of Miocene apes far exceeded that of today. Lineages such as Proconsul in Africa and Dryopithecus in Europe reveal a radiation of hominoids into multiple ecological niches. These apes inhabited forests and woodland environments, feeding on fruits, leaves, and other plant materials. The later Miocene, however, brought environmental shifts that reduced forest cover in many regions. As habitats fragmented, many ape lineages declined. Only a few would survive into the Pliocene, giving rise to modern great apes and humans. The expansion of grasslands in Africa likely influenced the evolutionary trajectory of certain primate populations. As forests receded and open habitats spread, selection pressures may have favored increased terrestriality in some lineages. Though bipedalism would not fully emerge until the Pliocene, the environmental context for its evolution was being established during the Miocene. Climate during the Miocene was not static. The epoch experienced a warming interval known as the Miocene climatic optimum around 17 to 15 million years ago. During this time, global temperatures temporarily rose, and Antarctic ice sheets partially retreated. However, this warmth was followed by renewed cooling and further ice expansion. This pattern of oscillation demonstrates that the Cenozoic climate system was highly sensitive to atmospheric carbon dioxide levels and tectonic configurations. As cooling resumed in the late Miocene, aridity intensified in many regions. Grasslands expanded further. Desert systems began forming in some continental interiors. In North America, the Great Plains developed into extensive grass-dominated ecosystems. Large grazing mammals roamed these landscapes, accompanied by formidable predators. In South America, isolation continued, shaping unique faunal assemblages. Native ungulates and marsupial predators coexisted with immigrant lineages that began arriving intermittently as tectonic shifts altered connectivity. Australia, fully separated from Antarctica by the Miocene, developed increasingly arid interiors. Marsupials diversified into herbivorous and carnivorous forms adapted to varied environments. The Miocene also witnessed significant changes in ocean gateways. The gradual closure of the seaway between North and South America began altering Atlantic and Pacific circulation patterns, though full closure would occur later in the Pliocene. These changes influenced heat transport and marine productivity. The Mediterranean region experienced dramatic fluctuations in sea level and salinity during the late Miocene, culminating in the Messinian salinity crisis. During this event, restricted water exchange between the Atlantic and Mediterranean led to extensive evaporation, causing sea levels to drop dramatically within the basin. Vast salt deposits formed as water evaporated. Eventually, the connection to the Atlantic was restored, refilling the basin in a catastrophic flood. Such events illustrate how tectonics and sea level interact to produce rapid environmental transformations. By the end of the Miocene, around 5.3 million years ago, Earth had become cooler and more arid than at its beginning. Grasslands were widespread. Antarctic ice persisted. The Arctic was beginning to show signs of glaciation, though full northern hemisphere ice sheets would not appear until later. Biologically, the Miocene established many of the dominant mammalian families recognizable today: bovids, cervids, canids, felids, and hominoids, all diversified during this epoch. Marine mammal lineages refined their ecological roles. Birds adapted to open habitats and grassland ecosystems. The Miocene was therefore an age of scaling up, Herbivores grew larger and more specialized. Predators became more efficient and often social. Apes radiated widely before contracting. Marine predators reached extraordinary sizes. The interplay between climate, tectonics, and biology was continuous. Cooling climates favored grasslands. Grasslands favored grazing mammals. Grazing mammals favored pursuit predators. Mountain uplift altered wind and rainfall patterns. Ocean currents redistributed heat. Carbon cycling feedbacks modulated temperature. The world that followed the dinosaurs had now matured into a planet defined by mammals at every scale, from vast herds crossing plains to whales filtering oceans. Yet the Miocene was not the end point. As the epoch closed, conditions were aligning for another transformation. The closure of the Isthmus of Panama would soon reorganize global ocean circulation. Northern Hemisphere glaciation would intensify. African environments would continue shifting, shaping the lineage that would eventually produce humans. The fourth chapter of the Cenozoic tells the story of expansion and adaptation in an increasingly open world. Forests gave way to grasslands. Mammals adapted to speed and endurance. Apes flourished and declined. Oceans supported giants. The Miocene stands as a turning point when ecosystems became more recognizable to modern eyes. Savannas, grazing herds, pursuit predators, and complex marine food webs all trace their roots to this epoch. The dinosaurs had long been gone. In their place stood a world dominated not by reptiles of immense scale, but by mammals of extraordinary versatility. And as climates continued cooling and continents approached their modern configuration, the stage was set for the next decisive shift in Earth's story. By 5.3 million years ago, the Miocene had given way to the Pliocene, an epoch that would quietly prepare the world for ice ages, megafauna, and eventually humans. The Pliocene did not begin with a sudden catastrophe. It began with subtle but powerful reorganizations of ocean currents, atmospheric circulation, and continental connection. One tectonic event in particular reshaped the planet in a profound way: the final closure of the Central American Seaway. For millions of years, the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans had exchanged waters freely through a broad tropical passage between North and South America. As tectonic uplift gradually raised the Isthmus of Panama, this marine connection narrowed and eventually closed. By roughly 3 million years ago, the two continents were joined by land. This seemingly regional event had global consequences. The closure altered ocean circulation patterns. Warm surface waters that once flowed between oceans were redirected. The Gulf Stream strengthened, carrying warm tropical water northward into the Atlantic. Increased moisture transport to high northern latitudes contributed to heavier snowfall. Over time, this helped set the stage for the growth of northern hemisphere ice sheets. In effect, the Pliocene marks the beginning of a world moving toward recurring glaciation. Temperatures during the early Pliocene were still warmer than today, but cooler than much of the Miocene. Atmospheric carbon dioxide levels were higher than modern pre-industrial levels, yet declining compared to earlier Cenozoic periods. Antarctic ice remained firmly established. Gradually, Arctic ice began expanding. Sea levels fluctuated as ice volumes changed. Coastlines shifted. Marine habitats reorganized. On land, grasslands had become dominant across large portions of Africa, Eurasia, and North America. The Pliocene world was increasingly open. Forests persisted in tropical regions and certain temperate zones, but savannas and prairies were widespread. This environmental context shaped evolutionary trajectories in profound ways. Large herbivores flourished. Horses reached greater sizes and diversity. Their single-toed limbs adapted for speed across open plains. Bovids, including antelope-like grazers, expanded dramatically in Africa and Eurasia. Early members of the deer family diversified. Rhinoceroses, some enormous, roamed grasslands and woodlands. Elephants and their relatives underwent significant evolution during this time. Proboscideans developed larger bodies, more complex teeth for grinding vegetation, and social behaviors likely tied to herd dynamics. In Africa and Eurasia, elephant ancestors spread widely. Predators adapted accordingly. Cats refined their stalking and ambush techniques in mosaic habitats of grass and woodland. Saber-toothed forms continued evolving, though different species replaced earlier Miocene varieties. Canids diversified into both pursuit hunters and opportunistic omnivores. Bears, having emerged earlier, occupied flexible ecological roles. The Pliocene ecosystems increasingly resembled those familiar from later Ice Age landscapes, though climates were still relatively mild compared to the severe glaciations that would follow. In South America, the most dramatic biological event of the Pliocene was the Great American Biotic Interchange. When the Isthmus of Panama formed, it created a land bridge between North and South America. For tens of millions of years, South America had been isolated, evolving a unique assemblage of mammals, including native ungulates, giant flightless predatory birds, and marsupial carnivores. The land bridge changed everything. Mammals from North America migrated southward, including cats, dogs, bears, horses, and deer. South American species moved northward, including ground sloths, armadillos, and opossums. Competition intensified. Many native South American predators and herbivores declined or went extinct under pressure from northern immigrants. This interchange reshaped faunal distributions across the Western Hemisphere and remains one of the most significant biogeographic events of the Cenozoic. In Africa, the Pliocene landscape was undergoing its own transformation. The gradual cooling and drying of the continent expanded savanna ecosystems. Forest fragmentation increased. This shifting environment played a decisive role in the evolution of hominins. The earliest known bipedal hominins had appeared in the late Miocene, but it was during the Pliocene that bipedalism became firmly established. Species such as Australopithecus walked upright while retaining some arboreal adaptations. Their anatomy reflects life in a mosaic environment where open grasslands alternated with patches of woodland. Bipedal locomotion offered advantages in such landscapes. Upright posture improves energy efficiency for long-distance walking. It elevates the head above tall grasses, aiding predator detection. It frees the hands for carrying objects or food. The Pliocene thus marks a pivotal stage in human evolutionary history. Climate fluctuations during this epoch likely influenced hominin evolution through repeated cycles of environmental change. Variability rather than stability may have selected for cognitive flexibility and adaptability. Elsewhere, primate lineages diversified into monkeys and apes. Old World monkeys thrived in various habitats across Africa and Asia. Apes, once highly diverse in the Miocene, were now more restricted in range. Only a few lineages would survive into the next epoch, giving rise to modern chimpanzees, gorillas, and humans. Marine ecosystems continued evolving in response to ocean circulation changes. The strengthening of the Gulf Stream increased heat transport to northern latitudes, but also intensified evaporation and precipitation cycles. Upwelling zones along certain coastlines boosted marine productivity, supporting rich food webs. Baleen whales expanded in size and diversity, exploiting plankton blooms. Toothed whales refined echolocation and social complexity. Marine predators, such as sharks, remained dominant, though some lineages began declining toward the end of the Pliocene. Megalodon, the massive predatory shark of the Miocene, survived into the early Pliocene but eventually went extinct, possibly due to cooling oceans and competition with emerging marine mammal predators. As the Pliocene progressed, evidence for northern hemisphere glaciation increased. Ice sheets began forming on Greenland and parts of North America and Eurasia. These early glacial expansions were not yet as extensive as those of the Pleistocene, but they signaled a fundamental shift. Ice sheets influence global climate in multiple ways. They increase albedo, alter atmospheric circulation, and affect sea levels. As ice volume grew, sea levels fell. Continental shelves were exposed. New migration corridors opened. The Pliocene climate was characterized by increasing variability. Orbital cycles, known as Milankovitch cycles, influenced the distribution of solar radiation reaching Earth. Variations in eccentricity, obliquity, and precession altered seasonal and latitudinal energy patterns. As ice sheets grew, these cycles became increasingly important in pacing glacial and interglacial fluctuations. Toward the end of the Pliocene, around 2.6 million years ago, Earth crossed another threshold. Northern Hemisphere glaciation intensified dramatically, marking the beginning of the Pleistocene. But before that shift, the Pliocene world stood as a transitional landscape. Grasslands dominated. Large mammals roamed open plains. Ocean currents were reorganized. Ice was spreading in the north. The evolutionary arms race between herbivores and predators continued. Herbivores grew larger and more specialized. Predators refined their hunting strategies. Social behavior likely became increasingly important in both prey and predator species. Elephants developed more advanced molars for grinding tough vegetation. Horses reached peak diversity. Antelope species multiplied across Africa. Large cats evolved powerful physiques adapted to ambush in grassland environments. The Great American Biotic Interchange reshaped Western Hemisphere ecosystems. Some South American native ungulates persisted, but many declined. North American predators spread widely. The Pliocene also saw increasing aridity in parts of Asia, contributing to the expansion of steppe environments. In North America, grasslands reached peak extent. In Africa, the combination of tectonic uplift in the East African Rift System and climate change produced diverse habitats ranging from lakes and forests to open savannas. These dynamic landscapes were crucial for hominin evolution. By the close of the Pliocene, the world was poised for ice. The climate system had shifted sufficiently that glacial cycles would soon dominate global patterns. Ice sheets would advance and retreat repeatedly over the next 2.6 million years. The fifth chapter of the Cenozoic tells the story of connection and convergence. Continents linked, oceans reorganized, grasslands spread further, large mammals reached ecological prominence. Early humans walked upright across African plains. The dinosaurs had vanished tens of millions of years earlier. Mammals had risen in forests, expanded across grasslands, conquered oceans, and diversified into countless forms. Now, the planet was preparing for a more volatile phase. The stable warmth of the early Cenozoic was long gone. In its place stood a world of increasing climatic oscillation. The Pliocene did not end in catastrophe. It ended in transition. Ice would soon dominate the narrative, and with it would come mammoths, saber-toothed cats of new kinds, vast human migrations, and the shaping of modern landscapes. The stage was set for the Age of Ice. Around 2.6 million years ago, Earth entered a new climatic regime that would dominate the remainder of the Cenozoic era. This was the beginning of the Pleistocene, the epoch of repeated ice ages. Unlike earlier cooling phases, the Pleistocene was defined by rhythmic oscillation. Massive continental ice sheets expanded and retreated in cycles lasting tens of thousands of years. These glacial and interglacial intervals were paced primarily by variations in Earth's orbit and axial tilt, known collectively as Milankovitch cycles. Changes in solar radiation distribution triggered feedback loops involving ice albedo, greenhouse gases, and ocean circulation. The result was a planet in motion. During glacial maxima, ice sheets more than a kilometer thick covered large portions of North America, Northern Europe, and Asia. Sea levels dropped by as much as 120 meters. Vast continental shelves were exposed. Land bridges connected regions that are today separated by oceans. During interglacial periods, ice retreated, sea levels rose, and climates warmed. Forests expanded into areas previously dominated by tundra. Lakes and rivers reorganized. This constant reshaping of landscapes exerted immense evolutionary pressure. The Pleistocene world was one of extremes. In the northern hemisphere, tundra and steppe ecosystems spread across wide latitudes during cold phases. These environments supported large grazing mammals, adapted to cold and open terrain. Among the most iconic were mammoths, woolly rhinoceroses, giant bison, and musk oxen. Mammoths, relatives of modern elephants, developed thick insulating fur, subcutaneous fat layers, and long curved tusks. Their molars were adapted for grinding coarse grasses. They moved in herds across what is now Siberia, Europe, and North America. Saber-toothed cats of the genus Smilodon became apex predators in the Americas. With elongated canine teeth and powerful forelimbs, they likely employed ambush strategies rather than pursuit. Dire wolves, American lions, and short-faced bears shared these ecosystems, forming complex predator guilds. In South America, giant ground sloths, some the size of elephants, browsed vegetation. Glyptodonts, heavily armored relatives of armadillos, roamed plains. These animals were remnants of earlier South American evolutionary history, now interacting with northern migrants following the Great American Biotic Interchange. In Africa, megafaunal diversity remained high. Elephants, hippos, large antelope, and formidable predators such as lions and hyenas dominated savannas. Unlike other continents, Africa retained much of its megafauna into the Holocene. The Pleistocene was not only the age of megafauna, it was the age of humans. Early in the epoch, species of the genus Homo were already present in Africa. Homo habilis, and later Homo erectus, displayed increased brain size compared to earlier hominins. They manufactured stone tools, controlled fire, and expanded beyond Africa into Eurasia. The fluctuating climates of the Pleistocene likely played a role in shaping human evolution. Environmental variability selected for cognitive flexibility, technological innovation, and social cooperation. As habitats shifted repeatedly, survival depended on adaptability. Homo erectus was the first hominin to achieve wide geographic distribution. Fossils indicate presence across Africa, the Middle East, Asia, and parts of Europe. These early humans endured climatic fluctuations by exploiting diverse food sources and habitats. By around 400,000 years ago, new human lineages emerged. In Europe and Western Asia, Neanderthals evolved, adapted to cold climates with robust bodies and large nasal cavities for warming cold air. In Africa, early forms of Homo sapiens were developing. The Pleistocene Ice Ages repeatedly opened and closed migration corridors. One of the most significant was the Bering Land Bridge, which connected Siberia and Alaska during periods of low sea level. This land bridge allowed animals and eventually humans to move between Asia and North America. Many North American megafauna trace ancestry to Eurasian lineages that crossed this bridge. Glacial cycles influence vegetation patterns dramatically. During cold maxima, forests retreated southward in the northern hemisphere, replaced by steppe tundra. During warmer interglacials, forests expanded northward again. These shifting habitats forced animal populations to migrate, adapt, or face extinction. Genetic isolation during glacial separations led to speciation in some cases. In others, environmental stress reduced populations to critical levels. The Pleistocene climate system was tightly coupled with atmospheric carbon dioxide levels. Ice core records reveal that CO2 concentrations fluctuated between roughly 180 parts per million during glacial maxima and 280 parts per million during interglacials. These changes amplified temperature swings through greenhouse effects. Ocean circulation also shifted during glacial cycles. Changes in salinity and temperature influenced thermohaline circulation, affecting global heat distribution. Despite the severity of glacial conditions, life persisted and often thrived. Cold, adapted species evolved remarkable physiological traits: thick fur, compact body shapes to minimize heat loss, and specialized metabolic adaptations characterized many Pleistocene mammals. Arctic foxes, reindeer, and musk oxen exemplify these cold-tolerant lineages. In contrast, tropical regions experienced less extreme cooling, but still underwent shifts in precipitation patterns. African rainforests expanded and contracted in response to glacial cycles, influencing primate and human populations. The late Pleistocene, particularly the last 200,000 years, was a time of significant human expansion. Homo sapiens emerged in Africa and gradually spread across the globe. By around 60,000 to 50,000 years ago, modern humans began dispersing out of Africa, reaching Australia by at least 50,000 years ago and Europe shortly thereafter. As humans entered new continents, they encountered ecosystems dominated by megafauna that had never faced hominin hunters. In Australia, giant marsupials disappeared within several thousand years of human arrival. In the Americas, many large mammals vanished toward the end of the Pleistocene. The causes of these megafaunal extinctions remain debated. Climate change at the end of the last glacial period undoubtedly stressed ecosystems. However, the timing of extinctions often correlates closely with human arrival, suggesting that overhunting, habitat alteration, or combined pressures played critical roles. The end of the Pleistocene, around 11,700 years ago, marked the conclusion of the last major glacial period. Ice sheets retreated from North America and Eurasia. Sea levels rose rapidly as meltwater returned to the oceans. Coastal landscapes were inundated, river systems reorganized. The transition into the Holocene brought relative climatic stability compared to the oscillations of the Pleistocene. This stability would prove crucial for the development of agriculture and civilization. But before that transformation, the Pleistocene had already reshaped the planet. Mountain glaciers carved valleys, continental ice sheets sculpted landscapes, depositing moraines and forming vast freshwater lakes. The Great Lakes of North America owe their existence to glacial activity. Isostatic rebound occurred where ice sheets melted, causing land to rise slowly after the immense weight of ice was removed. Even today, parts of Scandinavia and Canada continue rising. The Pleistocene was therefore not only an epoch of biological drama, but of geological transformation. The repeated advance and retreat of ice-redistributed sediments altered drainage systems and shaped the topography of continents. Human cultures developed within this volatile context. Early Homo sapiens adapted to varied climates from African savannas to European tundra. They developed clothing, shelters, art, and increasingly complex social structures. Cave paintings in Europe, dating to the late Pleistocene, depict animals such as bison, horses, and mammoths. These artworks provide evidence of cognitive sophistication and symbolic thought. Neanderthals, once thought primitive, exhibited cultural complexity as well. They buried their dead and may have created symbolic objects. Ultimately, however, Neanderthals disappeared around 40,000 years ago, possibly due to competition, climate stress, or interbreeding with Homo sapiens. By the close of the Pleistocene, most large terrestrial megafauna outside Africa had vanished. Mammoths, giant sloths, saber-toothed cats, and many others disappeared within a relatively brief geological window. The extinction of megafauna altered ecosystems significantly. Without large grazers, vegetation patterns changed, predator guilds collapsed, nutrient cycling shifted. The Pleistocene stands as a testament to the power of climate oscillation combined with emerging human influence. It was the epoch when ice ruled the northern continents, when massive mammals roamed frozen plains, when humans spread across every habitable landmass. The sixth chapter of the Cenozoic tells the story of survival in cycles. Ice advanced, ice retreated, species adapted or perished. Humans evolved from regional primates into a global species. The dinosaurs had long vanished. The great Miocene and Pliocene expansions had set the stage. Now, under the shadow of ice, the final transformation of the Cenozoic was underway. With the end of the last glacial maximum, a new epoch began, one defined not by ice alone, but by human dominance. The Holocene awaited. Around 11,700 years ago, the Earth emerged from the grip of the last great glacial maximum. The vast ice sheets that had blanketed North America, Northern Europe, and parts of Asia began their final retreat. Temperatures rose, sea levels climbed rapidly as meltwater poured back into the oceans. River systems reorganized. Vegetation advanced into landscapes that had been frozen tundra for tens of thousands of years. This marked the beginning of the Holocene. Compared to the violent climatic oscillations of the Pleistocene, the Holocene has been remarkably stable. That stability, measured on geological timescales, was subtle but decisive. Seasonal patterns persisted. Temperature fluctuations occurred, but not with the extreme amplitude of glacial cycles. For the first time in millions of years, humanity existed in a relatively predictable climate system. This stability changed everything. As ice retreated, ecosystems reassembled. Forests expanded northward into Europe and North America. Grasslands adjusted to new rainfall patterns. Large freshwater lakes formed from glacial meltwater. Sea levels rose more than 100 meters compared to glacial maxima, flooding coastal plains and reshaping continental margins. Human populations, already widespread by the end of the Pleistocene, adapted to these changing landscapes. During the early Holocene, humans were still primarily hunter-gatherers. They followed migratory herds, exploited coastal resources, and occupied diverse habitats from deserts to forests. But climatic stability encouraged a profound innovation: agriculture. In several regions independently, humans began domesticating plants and animals. In the Fertile Crescent of Southwest Asia, early agricultural communities cultivated wheat and barley and domesticated goats and sheep. In East Asia, rice cultivation emerged. In Mesoamerica, maize was domesticated. In the Andes, potatoes and llamas became central to subsistence. In Africa, sorghum and millet were cultivated. Agriculture allowed humans to settle permanently. Villages formed. Food surpluses enabled population growth. Social complexity increased. Specialization of labor emerged. Trade networks expanded. The Holocene thus marks the transformation of humans from one species among many into a dominant ecological force. As agriculture expanded, landscapes changed. Forests were cleared for fields. Irrigation altered river systems. Domestic animals grazed land intensively. Over centuries and millennia, human land use began reshaping ecosystems at regional scales. While megafauna had already declined sharply by the end of the Pleistocene, the Holocene witnessed continued biodiversity losses, often associated with human expansion into new territories. Island ecosystems were particularly vulnerable. In places like Madagascar and New Zealand, large endemic species vanished following human arrival. Yet for much of the early Holocene, human impact remained regionally limited. Climate during the early to mid-Holocene included intervals such as the Holocene climatic optimum, when temperatures in certain regions were slightly warmer than today. Northern forests extended farther north. Deserts like the Sahara were greener, supporting lakes and wildlife. Gradually, however, climatic conditions shifted again. Around 8,200 years ago, a sudden cooling event occurred, likely triggered by the drainage of proglacial lakes into the North Atlantic, disrupting ocean circulation temporarily. Though brief on geological timescales, such events illustrate that even the Holocene was not entirely stable. Human societies adapted to these fluctuations. By around 5,000 years ago, large civilizations emerged. In Mesopotamia, city-states developed complex irrigation systems along the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. In Egypt, the Nile's predictable flooding supported a centralized kingdom. In the Indus Valley, urban centers with advanced planning and drainage systems flourished. In China, early dynasties established agricultural and technological innovations. These civilizations transformed landscapes more intensively than any prior human societies. Deforestation expanded. Mining began extracting metals. Irrigation altered sediment transport and soil chemistry. The biological dominance that mammals had gradually achieved through the Cenozoic now faced a new agent of change: human culture and technology. Domesticated animals multiplied: cattle, pigs, sheep, goats, horses, and chickens spread across continents. Their grazing patterns altered vegetation structure. Selective breeding changed their anatomy and behavior. As maritime technologies advanced, humans crossed oceans deliberately, not only accidentally. Trade networks connected continents. Crops and livestock were transported across regions, reshaping ecosystems through what would later be known as the Columbian Exchange. Throughout the Holocene, climate continued to fluctuate modestly. The medieval warm period, roughly 1,000 years ago, brought relatively warm conditions to parts of Europe and the North Atlantic. Viking explorers reached Greenland and even parts of North America. Agriculture expanded into higher latitudes. Later, the Little Ice Age, beginning around the 14th century, brought cooler temperatures to parts of the northern hemisphere. Glaciers advanced in alpine regions. Harvest failures occurred in some areas. Societies experienced stress linked to climate variability. Yet compared to the dramatic Ice Age oscillations of the Pleistocene, these Holocene fluctuations were moderate. The defining feature of the late Holocene was not natural climate change, but accelerating human influence. The Industrial Revolution, beginning in the 18th century, marked a turning point. Fossil fuels, formed from ancient biological material over millions of years, were burned in vast quantities. Coal, oil, and natural gas released carbon dioxide into the atmosphere at rates far exceeding natural background levels. Atmospheric CO2 concentrations, which had fluctuated between roughly 180 and 280 parts per million during Pleistocene cycles, began rising rapidly. By the 20th century, they exceeded 300 parts per million. In the 21st century, they surpassed 400. This increase intensified the greenhouse effect. Global average temperatures began rising measurably. Glaciers retreated. Arctic sea ice declined. Sea levels rose as thermal expansion, and melting ice contributed additional water to the oceans. The Holocene, once defined by climatic stability, entered a new phase of anthropogenic warming. Many scientists argue that this transformation represents a transition into a new epoch, the Anthropocene. While not yet formally ratified in geological timescales, the concept reflects the reality that human activity now influences atmospheric chemistry, sediment deposition, biodiversity patterns, and even the stratigraphic record. Plastic pollution, radioactive isotopes and nuclear testing, industrial metals, and altered carbon cycles leave distinct signatures in sediments worldwide. Biologically, the modern era is characterized by accelerated extinction rate. Habitat destruction, climate change, pollution, and overexploitation have driven numerous species to extinction. The current rate of biodiversity loss far exceeds background extinction rates typical of the Cenozoic. Some researchers describe this as a sixth mass extinction, though it differs from previous events in being driven primarily by a single species. Yet the Holocene and Anthropocene are not solely stories of loss. They are also stories of unprecedented technological advancement. Humans have mapped genomes, explored deep oceans, and traveled beyond Earth's atmosphere. Satellites monitor climate systems in real time. Conservation efforts aim to protect endangered species. Renewable energy technologies seek to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. The trajectory of the Cenozoic, from the extinction of dinosaurs to the rise of humans, culminates in this moment. The Holocene illustrates how a species shaped by ice age variability harnessed intelligence and cooperation to alter planetary systems. Ice sheets that once dominated continents now retreat under warming trends. Rivers are dammed, forests are cleared and replanted. Wildlife populations decline and sometimes recover through conservation. The seventh chapter of the Cenozoic is therefore unique. It is the first epoch in which one species consciously understands its impact on planetary processes. From the Paleocene forests where small mammals cautiously diversified through the Eocene greenhouse, the Oligocene cooling, the Miocene grasslands, the Pliocene connections, and the Pleistocene Ice Ages, life adapted to forces beyond its control. Now, in the Holocene and emerging Anthropocene, the dominant force is internal to the biosphere itself. Humanity has become a geological agent. Coastlines shift not only because of natural sea level rise, but because of engineered modifications. Atmospheric chemistry changes due to industrial emissions. Species distributions shift not only with climate, but with transportation networks. The future trajectory of the Cenozoic remains unwritten. Will greenhouse gas concentrations continue rising, pushing Earth toward conditions reminiscent of the early Eocene? Will technological innovations stabilize climate and biodiversity? Will ecosystems reorganize in response to warming as they have in past epochs? The fossil record teaches that Earth is resilient, but not immutable. Mass extinctions have reshaped life before. Climate transitions have altered ecosystems dramatically. Yet never before has a single species wielded such concentrated influence. The Holocene stands as both culmination and threshold. It is the epoch in which the legacy of mammalian evolution intersects with technological civilization. It is the era in which Ice Age survivors built cities, cultivated crops, and ignited industrial revolutions. From the ashes of dinosaur extinction arose mammals. From mammalian evolution arose humans. From human societies emerged global systems capable of altering atmosphere and ocean. The Cenozoic began with ecological vacancy and evolutionary opportunity. It now continues with ecological strain and conscious choice. The story of Earth after the dinosaurs has become inseparable from the story of humanity. And the next chapter will depend not only on tectonics, orbital cycles, or volcanic eruptions, but on decisions made within a single species. The Cenozoic endures, but its direction is no longer shaped by geology alone. The final chapter of the Cenozoic is not written in stone alone. It is written in data in satellites orbiting Earth, in ice cores drilled from Antarctica, in shrinking glaciers, in warming oceans, and in expanding cities visible from space at night. If the Holocene provided the stable climatic platform upon which human civilization rose, the late Holocene and early 21st century represent a departure from that stability. Many scientists now argue that the Earth has entered a new geological interval driven primarily by human activity. Whether formally named or not, this transformation is measurable in atmospheric chemistry, biodiversity trends, sediment layers, and climate systems. To understand where the Cenozoic stands today, it is necessary to step back and view the entire arc of the era. 66 million years ago, an asteroid impact ended the reign of non-avian dinosaurs. The Paleocene was an age of recovery. The Eocene was an age of warmth and experimentation. The Oligocene introduced polar ice. The Miocene expanded grasslands and modern mammalian lineages. The Pliocene connected continents and set the stage for northern hemisphere glaciation. The Pleistocene oscillated between ice and warmth, while humans evolved. The Holocene allowed civilization to flourish. Now, the trajectory is accelerating again. Atmospheric carbon dioxide concentrations have risen from approximately 280 parts per million before the Industrial Revolution to over 420 parts per million today. This increase has occurred within a few centuries, a rate far faster than most natural carbon cycle shifts documented in the geological record. The Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum, often cited as a rapid warming event, unfolded over thousands of years. Modern emissions are altering atmospheric chemistry in mere decades. Global average temperatures have risen by more than 1 degree Celsius above pre-industrial levels. Though this may seem modest, the climate system amplifies small shifts. Heat waves intensify. Precipitation patterns shift. Droughts lengthen in some regions, while extreme rainfall increases in others. Arctic sea ice has declined significantly in both extent and thickness. Greenland's ice sheet is losing mass. Mountain glaciers worldwide are retreating. Antarctica, once considered stable, shows increasing signs of ice shelf destabilization in certain sectors. Sea levels are rising as warming oceans expand and melting ice adds volume. Coastal cities, many built during the relatively stable Holocene sea level plateau, now face gradual encroachment by the sea. Ocean chemistry is also changing. As atmospheric carbon dioxide dissolves into seawater, it forms carbonic acid, lowering ocean pH. This process, known as ocean acidification, affects organisms that build shells or skeletons from calcium carbonate. Coral reefs, already stressed by warming waters and pollution, face compounded threats. In past epochs of the Cenozoic, climate shifts unfolded over millennia or millions of years. Ecosystems had time, though not unlimited, to migrate and adapt. Today, the rate of change challenges the adaptive capacity of many species. Habitat fragmentation further compounds the problem. Human infrastructure divides landscapes into isolated patches. Migration corridors are blocked by roads, cities, and agricultural fields. Species that once shifted ranges in response to climate now encounter barriers. Extinction rates have accelerated. Amphibians are declining globally due to disease, habitat loss, and climate stress. Large mammals face pressure from poaching and shrinking habitats. Insects, critical to pollination and ecosystem function, show regional population declines. The fossil record of the Cenozoic reveals 5 major mass extinctions prior to the present. Each reshaped life dramatically. The asteroid impact at the end of the Cretaceous was sudden and catastrophic. Other extinctions unfolded through volcanic eruptions, climate shifts, or ocean anoxia. Today's biodiversity crisis differs in origin but not necessarily in potential magnitude. Human activity drives habitat destruction through deforestation, urbanization, and agriculture. Industrial fishing depletes marine stocks. Pollution contaminates air, soil, and water. Invasive species spread through global trade networks. Yet humanity is also capable of conscious mitigation. International agreements aim to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Renewable energy technologies expand rapidly. Protected areas conserve critical habitats. Reforestation efforts restore degraded lands. Scientific research improved understanding of climate feedbacks and ecological resilience. The final chapter of the Cenozoic is therefore characterized by tension between degradation and restoration. Climate models project multiple possible futures depending on emission trajectories. Under high emission scenarios, global temperatures could rise several degrees Celsius by the end of the century, approaching conditions not seen since the early Cenozoic greenhouse world. Under aggressive mitigation, warming could be limited, stabilizing climate closer to late Holocene norms. The geological record provides context. During the Eocene, high carbon dioxide levels supported warm polar forests and ice-free continents. Sea levels were much higher than today. Crocodilians inhabited Arctic latitudes. Mammals thrived in greenhouse conditions. But ecosystems were entirely different from those on which modern civilization depends. Returning to such conditions within centuries would challenge agricultural systems, water resources, and coastal infrastructure built during the comparatively cool Quaternary. The cryosphere plays a central role. The persistence of Antarctic and Greenland ice sheets has shaped global sea level for millions of years. Complete melting of Greenland would raise sea levels by several meters. Antarctic ice holds even greater potential. The stability of these ice sheets depends on temperature thresholds and ocean interactions. Feedback loops are critical. Warming reduces ice cover, decreasing albedo and increasing heat absorption. Thawing permafrost releases methane, a potent greenhouse gas. Forest dieback reduces carbon sequestration capacity. Conversely, reforestation and soil restoration can draw carbon from the atmosphere. The Cenozoic has been a story of carbon balance. From volcanic outgassing and mountain weathering to ocean sequestration and biological productivity, carbon cycling has regulated climate over millions of years. Human emissions now perturb this cycle at unprecedented rates. The biosphere responds. Some species expand their ranges poleward, others shift phenology, altering breeding and migration timing. Coral bleaching events increase in frequency. Forest fire regimes intensify in certain regions due to heat and drought. Yet resilience exists. Marine reserves show fish populations recovering when protected. Reintroduction programs restore keystone species such as wolves, reshaping ecosystems through trophic cascades. Renewable energy adoption reduces reliance on fossil fuels. The defining question of this chapter is not whether change is occurring, but how it will unfold. Unlike earlier Cenozoic transitions driven by tectonics or orbital cycles, The current shift is influenced by deliberate policy decisions, technological development, and societal choices. Human population growth has plateaued or slowed in many regions, yet global consumption remains high. Urbanization concentrates populations, potentially reducing per capita land use if managed sustainably. Technological innovation offers both risk and opportunity. Geoengineering proposals aim to reflect sunlight or remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. These interventions carry uncertainties and ethical considerations. Conservation biology seeks to preserve genetic diversity and ecosystem function. Protected areas now cover significant portions of Earth's surface, though enforcement and connectivity vary. The late Cenozoic thus stands at a crossroads. From a geological perspective, the changes of the past 2 centuries will leave a distinct signature in sediment layers. Altered isotope ratios, synthetic materials, microplastics, and rapid species turnover. From a biological perspective, the coming centuries may determine whether biodiversity loss stabilizes or accelerates. From a climatic perspective, the magnitude of warming will shape sea levels, weather extremes, and ecosystem distribution for thousands of years. The dinosaurs never anticipated the asteroid that ended their reign. Mammals did not foresee the ice ages that tested them. Early humans did not predict the industrial transformation that would alter atmospheric chemistry, but modern humanity possesses foresight. Climate science, paleontology, geology, and ecology collectively provide a long-term perspective unavailable to previous species. Ice cores reveal atmospheric composition over hundreds of thousands of years. Marine sediments record temperature and carbon fluctuations. Fossils document responses to past warming events. This knowledge carries responsibility. The Cenozoic began with a mass extinction that reset life's trajectory. It evolved through warmth and ice, through continental drift and ocean reorganization, through evolutionary innovation and ecological restructuring. Now, the era continues under the influence of a self-aware species. Will the Anthropocene, if formally recognized, represent a brief perturbation followed by stabilization, or will it initiate long-term changes comparable to past greenhouse intervals? The answer depends on cumulative human action. The Earth system remains governed by physical laws. Carbon dioxide traps heat, ice reflects sunlight, oceans absorb energy and redistribute it. Ecosystems function through nutrient cycling and energy flow. Human decisions influence the inputs to these systems. Renewable energy expansion reduces greenhouse emissions. Sustainable agriculture preserves soil carbon. Conservation maintains biodiversity and ecosystem resilience. Failure to mitigate emissions accelerates warming. Habitat destruction reduces resilience. Pollution undermines ecosystem health. The 8th chapter of the Cenozoic is therefore unprecedented. It is the first time in Earth's 4.5 billion-year history that a single species has both driven planetary scale change and possessed the cognitive capacity to understand it. From Paleocene forests to Pleistocene ice sheets, from Miocene grasslands to Holocene cities, the Cenozoic tells a story of adaptation. The dinosaurs gave way to mammals. Mammals diversified into whales, elephants, primates, and humans. Humans reshaped landscapes, then industrialized, then globalized. The planet now warms at a pace rivaling some ancient carbon release events. Ice retreats, species shift or vanish, New ecosystems form, yet the Cenozoic has always been dynamic. Change is not new. The rate and cause are. As the era continues, its trajectory will be shaped by interactions between natural processes and human influence. The climate system will respond to cumulative emissions. Oceans will buffer heat, but also acidify. Ice sheets will react to temperature thresholds. The legacy of the Cenozoic, thus far, demonstrates both fragility and resilience. Mass extinctions can reset ecosystems, but life eventually diversifies again. Climate transitions can eliminate lineages, yet new ones arise. Continents drift, mountains rise, oceans open and close. The final chapter is still unfolding. Whether it becomes a story of severe ecological contraction or of managed transition towards sustainability depends on choices made within decades, not millennia. The world that followed the dinosaurs has become the world shaped by humans, and the Cenozoic continues.